was telling me before the meeting that, look, part of her thinking is about the big picture, but she's also a farmer and she's got to think about when she's sending her produce to market to optimise the price against the timing and the other considerations. So this is a fantastic opportunity to get that blended experience from your big picture vision with the sort of factors that really press on you. So Lindiwe is an animal scientist. She has many governance roles globally, including with the Nestlé company, GESDA, and a number of university councils. And she is a former chair of the CGIAR. So it is a great personal pleasure to welcome you, Lindiwe, and ask you to present this plenary speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here at TropAg 2025. Congratulations, TropAg 2025, for having livestock in a plenary. It's rare that we get this opportunity for a limelight. But even more, congratulations for choosing a farmer to do the plenary, because there are eminent livestock scientists in the audience. I see my friend, Professor Favli, Professor Jikeng, from the Director General of ILRI, people I respect and from whom I draw a lot of wisdom. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Now, the bar has been set high on defining food security. And it's good that we zero in on two areas: livestock, Africa, and climate resilience. And I will try and unpack the challenges, given the theme for this conference, global challenges, within the context of livestock systems and Africa. So, if we look back at the history of TropAg, this is a platform that is respected and recognized for bringing the best of the best in terms of science in the tropics, but more important, bringing solutions. For us in Africa, the challenge is to bring these goals together in ways that sustain livelihoods, feed communities, and heal the planet. How do we get that all together? So I'll try and break this down in the context of the sub-themes of this conference, but maybe let me start with the conclusion, which is where our keynote speaker, Glenn, ended. It's all about people and their skills. If we don't invest in young people, if we don't empower them with skills, and I think as my colleague from Zambia said, how will we feed people when everyone's running to the cities for the lights, for the jobs? Is there a way we can keep them in the rural areas? Is there a way we can keep them in the agriculture sector? And I believe, yes, we can. And livestock, particularly for us in Africa, does provide an answer to all that. Now, why livestock? Clearly, nowadays, when you say livestock, it's beef, it's climate change, it is pollution, get rid of them. But livestock provides a livelihood for close to 1.7 billion people in the world. That is significant. And 60% of our rural households are dependent in some way or another on livestock. Livestock contributes up to 40% of the GDP in some countries, and I can name a few in Africa where we are inching towards that 40%. Livestock has the micronutrients, particularly in those countries where there is no choice. We talk about the Eat Lancet diet that was mentioned. It's good to go for a diet that is specified, provided you have the choice, you can afford it. That was the definition we were given on food security, access, affordability, and stability of those supplies. But we are talking of countries that don't have that luxury. But if we look globally in terms of where livestock sits, it's not all about beef. We are looking at pig meat. We are looking at cattle, this beef being in Australia, you're familiar with that. We're looking at chicken meat. We're looking at milk. And if you look at the top commodities in the world, livestock features as the top 4. So yes, it's important that we talk about livestock in its broader context, not just as beef for the world. And it contributes significantly to the world economy as being 5 of the top 10 foods that we consume. And who are those producers? Smallholder farmers. They provide the meat, they provide the milk, they provide the eggs, of course, and the staple cereals. But when we're talking production, we always think big. But think about that smallholder farmer on a 1-hectare plot, feeding their family, feeding their countries, and collectively feeding the world. And if you look at Africa, 72% of our farmers are smallholder farmers. Now, there are headwinds against the livestock sector. And as I say, livestock has become synonymous with climate change in the sense that the pollution, the greenhouse gases that come from agriculture, the first victim is always get rid of the animals. But there are more than that. There's livestock. We can be a friend and mitigate climate if it's done properly. If you look at all the protests that have been done and the miscommunication about eating of meat, yes, you look at countries, Australia, USA, you're at 25 kilograms per annum, per capita consumption. And you look at a country like DR Congo in Africa at 0.2 kilograms per capita per year. How do you close that gap? How do you nourish the children whom Glenn highlighted as being stunted? And when we're talking stunted, you're talking about a brain that has been shrunk in the first 5 years, and that shrinking can never be reversed. It means you have an underdeveloped child for life. Yet, the micronutrients from just a little bit more, 40 grams per day of meat, could have prevented that, and they cannot afford it. Yet we protest and generalize that livestock, beef production, meat consumption is bad for all. Context is important, and in Africa, we're still needing to close that gap for people to be sufficiently nourished on animal source foods. Let's go on to the elephant in the room. It's all about climate change. If you look at the challenge that we are facing now, the conversation is always about reducing greenhouse gases, but it's the damage that this has caused, climate change. If you look at pests and diseases, I speak as a farmer, we are facing new diseases that we have never known how to deal with, and we don't have the solutions. But what we do is use what you know best and what you've always done. No wonder we are getting antimicrobial resistance, because imagine for a farmer where traditionally we used to dip our cattle once in 2 weeks. Now we're doing it every week and at times twice a week. Imagine all the chemicals getting into that whole process. Can a farmer afford to follow the trends of the right medicines to be using? No, it's all about costs, affordability, but the challenge is right in their faces. The cost of inputs have gone up because of the recurrent droughts and low productivity. The market risks, we highlighted, challenge, Glenn also touched on that. We're looking for solutions. How best can you access markets? How best can we stabilize the markets? How best can we ensure supply to those markets in the face of climate change and diminishing returns from livestock investments? All these are risks that are not only local for Africa, but are global, and we need answers from science, research, and development. Now, in the quest for those answers, what we need to understand and contextualize is that when we talk in the African context, the production systems are different. I try here to depict 3 of the major production systems. We have the mixed crop livestock system, we have the pastoral system, we have the semi-intensive system. So in our research, context for each of those systems is different because the interventions will also be determined by the type of system that livestock are produced in. We've touched, thanks Glenn, you touched on what AI can bring to all this. We've not been good at collecting our data, and the challenge now is what are we going to feed into these new systems of generating quick responses, quick answers to the challenges that we face. I'm glad to say our governments are seized with the issue of investing in expedited data collection using satellites, and only now we understand the role of data collection in terms of decision-making at national level for policy and, more important, at farmer level. And I've just highlighted some of the areas where AI is already supporting livestock production systems. It's good to talk about what we can do, but how do you bring all that to the ground? So I thought I would share an experience with the benefits, which we already know, of how we can use drones on our farms to expedite delivery of vaccines. Rwanda is already ahead on that. But more important, for early warning systems, which is where we lag behind. So I'm looking at what are those future pathways where AI, big data, can expedite decision-making on farm at national level for Africa to leapfrog in terms of development. As I say, I'm glad that the African Union is already working with partners and is calling for more partners to help harness the tools, the skills, and build capacity within Africa for empowering the youth and smallholder farmers through digital inclusion. Otherwise, Africa will be left behind. I'm happy to share that I'm currently involved with the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. This is a new and growing platform which brings together scientists by way of academia, citizens, civil society, diplomats, and impact areas, and is asking the question, what is the science that we should be doing now to inform what we anticipate 10, 20, 25 years from now? We are all seized with the now, but the now is already here, and the questions and the answers are not on the shelf anymore. So we need to invest more in anticipatory investigations, and I'll encourage you to go online and look for GESDA and what we're doing. There's a radar where over 2,000 scientists are looking at different questions in terms of science that we should be dealing with for now to address the challenges that we are going to be facing. And those are some of the highlights in terms of what the tool, the radar that posts the impact areas that have already been defined has. Let me now go to climate and sustainability. I was honored last year to deliver a keynote in memory of Bill McClymont, and one thing that remained with me after that is his wisdom in his statement, all flesh is grass. That we can talk about production of food, we can separate our crops from our livestock, but at the end of the day, it's about sustainability. We need our livestock to feed the soil, nourish the soil, which gives us the cereals and all the other foods. So it's all interconnected. And it's amazing that 8 years back, we had this wisdom fed into our system. Only now are we harnessing the fruits and looking at sustainability as a big challenge in the work we do. In terms of climate change, agriculture is blamed, and Glenn already highlighted 30% of the emissions come from agriculture. But it's even worse when we talk livestock, and that red is the ruminant enteric fermentation. I'm happy to say here in Australia, a lot of work is going on in terms of research, but also globally, on how do you reduce the enteric fermentation from the rumen of the livestock so that you reduce the methane emissions from cattle. Now, back to the systems. There are many ways we can reduce emissions from livestock. The feed, the quality of the feed, the better the quality, the less the emissions. The animal health, as I said, we are experiencing so many diseases that we never had in the past. And if we are smart in terms of containing those diseases, we will be better able to deal with the productivity of those animals. The head structure, it's always been in Africa, head count over quality of those animals. But more and more farmers are realizing you get a drought, you lose more, but you better have less well-bred, well-fed animals that are worth more, and that's where also the issue of the market comes in. And finally, the improvement in grazing. All those are interventions that need to come into play for us to improve productivity in a climate-smart way. I'm also involved with a project called Qinisa out of South Africa, where we are really looking at how do we work together as universities, as private sector, as all the people who are worried in Southern Africa on reducing emissions from livestock. Its focus is on mitigation, and we carried out a study which has recently been published to measure who's got what equipment in the different institutions, what are they measuring, and how are they using the results from that research. The paper has been published recently, and what was interesting from that study is that there is no coordinating platform. Despite the fact that we have the International Livestock Research Institute, headquartered in Africa, in Southern Africa, on this work, everyone has been doing their own thing with very expensive equipment. And the recommendation from that study is collaboration is key. Let's bring the science, the research findings to the policymakers, and let's make sure we have the evidence that informs our policy development processes. Now, back to what Africa needs most. Everything I've said, just focus on the big scare factor. It's meant to be an advantage that Africa is the youngest continent. 60% of Africa's population are younger than 35 years old. And by 2050, 850 million youths, which is 1 in 3 people in the world, will be based in Africa. How do we prepare for this world? How do we equip these young people with skills that will keep them in the rural areas, that will generate food for the continent to be food secure and nutrition secure in a climate-smart way? If you ask any politician in Africa now, this is what gives them sleepless nights. It's no longer about feeding people, but it's about creating jobs. How do you keep the youth gainfully engaged in a core business, which is feeding the nation? Skills is what is needed. We've pushed people through university, and I'm sad to say agriculture has been the least attractive in terms of the go-to profession for most people. They end up in agriculture at the university because their aspiration was to be a vet or to be something better in their terms. And when they end up in agriculture, sadly, they don't even get the jobs because traditionally the employer was government, bit of private sector, which is thin, and NGOs. And all those are dying as employers of choice. So this points to entrepreneurial skills. And the greatest thing that has happened in agriculture is the turn to sustainable food systems. If you unpack the skills you can get from the farm to the table, we can create a whole new cadence of professions that we have not been traditionally training for. And I've tried to highlight some of the skills. And one of my greatest moments at the time I'm spending in Berlin was to meet a minister whose only career listed on his profile is that he's a butcher. Proudly so, and thanks to the German vocational training system, it's a dignified profession in sustainable food systems. Can you imagine how much more that can do for Africa if we dignified these professions and we trained people so that they walk into agriculture, they walk into food systems as a career of choice because they will be respected and they will earn well and they will employ others. So my main call is we've got the science, but as we train, let's look at those vocational skills that bring dignity to food systems, and let's create the curriculum within our universities to equip a new cadre of practitioners that will serve the sector. I've highlighted here the advantages of doing that, but for me, the main one is really job creation and dignified work. There's nothing as fulfilling as getting up every morning and knowing you're valued and you're contributing to your country. My call to action, thanks Glenn, you did touch on the CGIAR and the dwindling funding. But I think in terms of livestock, we are lucky in Africa that the International Livestock Research Institute is headquartered in Kenya and Ethiopia, but most important, doing science at global level, but bringing solutions to farmers. We're grateful to the support from the Australian constituency, University of Queensland, University of Melbourne, CSIRO, and ASIA, but we need more, because if we are talking of these new skills, if we are talking of more science for the people, this is the institution that is globally mandated to garner and support the national systems. And my appeal is, let's put more there and let's expand their mandate. I want to believe if we combine the best of science, we collaborate better, and we equip our young people with skills, we can build livestock systems that nourish people, that regenerate the ecosystems, and prepare every farmer to thrive in a changing climate. I thank you.
Okay, we have time for a question or two, and I see a hand's gone up here, and another one, so, and up the back. So we've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. So
Thank you very much for your nice presentation. So when we are talking about carbon emission, easily we can blame animals. We never blame us. I'm not sure if, can you hear me?
No. Not very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
that's good, thank you. When we are talking about carbon emission, we easily can blame animals, but we don't blame human. I'm not sure if we have any data on how much human is contributing to increase carbon emission. That is not my main question. My question is, actually, we are focusing more on reducing carbon emission that is emitted by animal culture. Do you think it would be more logical if we could focus more on recycling carbon by using other ways, just like greening urban or some other ways?
Did you get that? Yeah.
It's a bit difficult with the acoustics here, but my understanding is you say, why are we not reducing our carbon footprint? We would miss out from this 700 delegate gathering today if we all did that. We are doing it in different ways, but your main question was on, we are focusing on reducing carbon emissions rather than using the carbon in a circular economy. Yes, there's a lot of work that's been done. We are investing big time in biogas, but it's about scale. These technologies at farmer level, and I always like to think from a farmer perspective, particularly smallholder. You want technologies that bring the collective to work together, but at the same time benefit the individual. And I think we are not doing well in most of the technologies we are pushing. We expect advisory services that can reach our farmers, but we are not allowing innovations that can be farm-specific but collectively delivered. I don't know if that makes sense. So, yeah, the circular economy is a way of making sure that we can capitalize on circularity, but I think we still have an obligation of reducing the emissions. More so that we want to improve and increase productivity. We don't want to follow the traditional trajectory that led to where we are, so we want to be smart about it. So we cannot run away. I remember previous COPs, we said Africa is for adaptation and not for mitigation. We are smarter now. We say we need to adapt, but mitigation is a must for everybody. So I think we cannot run away from that.
Hi, Professor Sibanda. Thanks for your presentation. I'm here in the third row. I'm a member of the local agricultural press. My name's Zach, and I think a lot of our readers would also be pleased that we have a cattle producer as a keynote as well. I wanted to pick up on your point about the threat of invasive species. When I visit people in paddocks around Queensland, we're constantly talking about new and emerging risks. I'm just interested in the kinds of invasive species that that you've encountered in Africa and where you are in Africa in particular, and some ways that people are looking to mitigate them.
Yeah. So I would need a good botanist to talk about that. But in my world, what we are finding is that everything is now a surprise. You know, there was a stable time where it was all textbook-based. What you learned at school is what you saw on the ground. But if you're talking invasive species, you wake up and you're like, so what is this on my farm? And you ask a neighboring farmer and they're like, I've also got it and I've been watching. You ask the experts, they're like, we don't know anything about it. And I think this is where this anticipatory science I'm talking about is going to help us, because most of that we can predict if we have sufficient data and we are asking the right questions. And then the second thing is really about who are those scientists who are going to be focusing on what should we be doing now for what will affect us in the future, and the future is now. And the investment for controlling those new emerging, consuming challenges that will take up all our energy and efforts, and yet we don't have the right answers. And that's where I think AI should be pushed big time, but we need to equip people who understand the tools and who ask the right questions. So the big invasive species that we're seeing are in the grazing areas, which are pushing off your traditional grazing crops, your grazing areas being invaded with things that you don't know whether they're safe for your animals. We had an interesting talk on food safety yesterday, but you just continue as business as usual because you don't know much about those things. And that is why investing in science is key. Unless we have scientists who are really day to day looking into these challenges and providing us with answers, we will all be left behind. And what we know for agriculture for now will be irrelevant in the future, and we won't have the answers. Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got a last question.
Thank you. Thanks, Professor Sibanda. I'm a grains journalist, but I'm going to ask you a livestock question. What do you produce on your farm, and what happens to it? Is it consumed in your community, or does it go to towns or cities?
That's a difficult question. I'm happy to say I've got a couple of friends in the audience who've been to my farm. Where's Kathy Reed? She visited. There, she's right behind you. So traditionally, I grew up on an animal farm. My parents are really the source of all this. My father runs a cattle farm, and he had an abattoir and butcheries, retail, the whole value chain. So I was driving trucks at the age of 16, delivering meat to the butcheries. So I then went to study livestock, animal production, because that's what I understood the best. So I am farming cattle. I do goats as well. But the system in Zimbabwe is quite well developed in that you can either send your animals live to an auction, or you can send them to an abattoir. They are professionally graded, and you get your scorecard on how your animals have performed, and you're paid by the abattoir, which then distributes to retail butcheries. So we've got a fairly elaborate system for the beef sector. We did export in the past to EU, but with the sanctions now, that was stopped. But we've got established abattoirs in every province, which were built for export purposes. So it's quite an elaborate beef export system that we have there. We're also big on chickens, but I personally don't do that. I've always been a big animal cattle farmer. And I'm using the indigenous animal. I did move to Brahman exotic, but with the challenge of diseases, shortage of water, climate change induced pressure, I've gone back to our indigenous Tuli animal, and that's what I'm breeding now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Lindiwe. And some great takeaways from the talk. All flesh is grass, collaboration is key, and being very mindful about the opportunity and the challenge of the power and the promise.